Good afternoon, salam, and good evening to you, ladies, gents, and Pikachu. I wanted to have a little chat to you about the perfectly preserved status of the Holy Quran, the Book of the Muslims, the Quran of the Muslims, which I have been analysing and breaking down in my regular series. So, without further ado, let's just get right into the meat and gravy of is the Quran perfectly preserved and worth reading or not? I'm your host, Daily Corvid. Let's have a look. Muslims will tell you that their Quran has always been the same. There are no different versions. It is one book, one Quran for one God, perfectly preserved since the days of the Prophet. Every vowel, dot, sound and letter is exactly the same as when it first appeared. This is what they will tell you. But we find, as with most things Islamic, this falls apart under the simplest amount of scrutiny, much like the many versions of Quran that I have read through. Specifically this one. I mean, this one didn't even last a single reading before the cover disintegrated. And I feel like that's the problem that Islamic scholars have in the West, is under scrutiny these things just completely disintegrate. So let's have a little look at this theory that a perfectly preserved Quran proves that Islam is the one true religion and that Allah is the creative divine God of this universe. Section A is the basics of understanding the Qurans. First of all, let's have a look at what Wikipedia says, just to get the basics. So we'll read. The Quran is viewed to be the scriptural foundation of Islam and is believed by Muslims to have been sent down by God himself, who actually isn't God, who they think is Allah. It has been revealed to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel, who they call Jabril, and that's how it came about. So, the Quran has also been subject to criticism, both in the sense of being the subject of an interdisciplinary field of study, where secular, mostly Western scholars, set aside doctrines of its divinity, perfection, unchangeability, etc., accepted by Muslim Islamic scholars, but also in the sense of being found fault by those, including by Christian missionaries and other skeptics hoping to convert Muslims, who argue it is not divine, not perfect, and or not perfectly or particularly morally elevated. Oh my goodness me, even talking about this book is long-winded. So let's look at that. So straight away you can see a problem there. Their holy book, which they hold in high esteem, they think that God himself, Allah to them, has directly had an influence in writing this book. And this guy Muhammad is very important to the keeping and preservation of this thing. And it is God literally talking. That's what they think. But then they don't actually look at it in any great detail because they feel that asking critical questions and fact-checking this document, despite the fact that it's from God and it should stand up to scrutiny, they actually find it very offensive and they will threaten to kill you or harm you if you speak against it, even when you're doing critical studies. That is why only Westerners, or mostly Westerners, are the ones who have done this critical study. It's not that Muslims don't believe or have doubts that this is not actually the word of God, but in their culture, in the Arabic countries, there is a physical punishment for having done those studies, for having asked those questions even. And those punishments range from a simple whipping in the street, 30 lashes, to having 7 stones thrown at your head by observers, to having your hands and feet cut off on opposite sides and then being beheaded and burnt in a shallow grave. These are things that they will do to you. If you're in an Islamic country and you are found to be critically analysing this book, the Quran, these things will 100% be done to you in law. The government will be doing those to you, and there will be a crowd of people cheering over your body. So the first question that I have for these Islamic scholars is, if this book is perfectly preserved and it is a oneness, there's only one copy, how is it that I have so many different copies here which I can freely buy on the internet or from bookshops, and these are all sanctioned and ratified by different Islamic scholars and Islamic authorities? For instance, the first one I did, the one that fell apart, this is a mosque Quran in Arabic, looking something like this. This was the first one that I read, and I thought this will be perfectly preserved because it's a mosque copy. Excuse me. It's a mosque copy, so it must be true. But what I found is, even though this is accepted by some, Other Muslims were sending me death threats and saying this is a false Quran. Anyone who reads this is an infidel. So there we straight away have some Muslims calling other Muslims infidels just for reading the wrong Quran. Excuse me. Then I got hold of this book by Peter McLaughlin and Tommy Robinson, which is a breakdown of Muhammad's Quran, the one which purportedly was used by Muhammad, which was the first one that was ever written. Now, this breaks it down verse by verse, and is a very long-winded way of saying the book doesn't even agree with itself. Then I got hold of this one, which an ex-Muslim, who is now no longer with us, he gave me the idea to buy this one and said this would be the most accurate Arabic translation. By an Egyptian-born now Christian called Usama Dakdok. I read through this one and thought, oh, this one sounds much more accurate because it kind of agrees with this one. But then further on down the line, many Muslims were complaining and threatening me with violence and death for reading this Quran, saying it's and they actually said, how can it be true when it isn't even a Muslim who's written it? So according to these guys, you require belief in order to understand this book, and that means only a biased source can ever give you a non-biased account of it, according to Muslims. So you can see where the problems are going to spring up in that line of inquiry. Then we have the Hafiz, or the Hafs Quran. This is the one most British Muslims seem to favour, which looks like this, and has Arabic on one side, English on the other. Now, I've got to admit, this is actually superior just as a literary work of reading to those ones there. These ones here are very boring, and they are tough to chew through. You know, it's like eating a piece of wood. It's not easy to get through. At least this one reads it more interestingly as a narrative, as a story. But once again, I was getting death threats by different kind of Muslims who said, this is for infidels. This is the Quran of the infidels. So, I am now 6 months into my work at this point, and I have 4 different copies of Qurans that all disagree with each other. And that means I have 4 different sets of Muslims threatening to kill me for reading those books. 4 different sets of Muslims. But it's a religion of peace. Heading back over to Wikipedia, in critical historical study, scholars such as John Wansborough, Joseph Schacht, Patricia Kroon and Michael Cook seek to investigate and verify the Quran's origin, text, composition, history, examining questions, puzzles and difficulty in the text, etc., as they would any non-sacred ancient text. Now that sounds fair enough to me. Let's put it through the scrutiny any other book would have to face. And what ended up happening is once the Islamic communities of the world had realised that this criticism was going on in the West, they were feared. They were greatly feared, and they thought, how is the Quran going to stack up and stand up to this tough Western critique, this critical analysis, this fair looking over? And they knew it wasn't going to do well. So what happened is a new version of the Quran was then generated, and this was propagated in some regions of the Islamic faith as the perfectly preserved copy that overwrote the original Muhammad's Quran and was given more prominence than Uthman's Dark Age compilation, which is called the Hafs. So we ended up with this one, the Tajweed Quran with the meanings translated into English. And that looks kind of like this. So it's got the Islamic bit here, and then you can read the Islamic bit in English text, and then here it's got the English meaning. So even though it says the meanings translated into English, the translated English meanings don't match the Islamic text, the Arabic text. And the Arabic text, when you read it in English letters, doesn't actually mean the same thing. So you've got 3 different versions in the Tajweed Quran. You've got the Arabic writing, which is an edited version of this one. You've then got the translated meanings, which isn't actually Quran at all. It's an interpretive commentary. And you have that in Arabic when you speak it. And because they have color-coded different parts that you speak in different ways, it accentuates and it promotes the understanding in a different way. You know, it focuses on different words in the sentence, which changes the complexion of how you understand it. And this is the one that we've been reading most recently in the series Without Lies, Islam Dies. They asked me specifically to start my whole series again and use this one, so I was happy to oblige. But I think we can see now, when we are faced with Muslim scholars telling us it is word for word perfectly preserved, there is only one Quran, We can see here, no, that's not true. There is at least 8 different Qurans. There's 7 different translations or methods of recitation. Muhammad even mentions this in the Quran that this one here, the original one that he had. He even says to his companions that there are 7 different ways that this can be recited. So there's 7 different Qurans from the first day. And then also we find in this one, on page 1, they even tell us that it's not perfectly preserved. Because they say, and I quote, "Its letters were vowelized during the days of Imam Ali." Now, Imam Ali was born 120 years after Muhammad had already died. So it cannot be perfectly preserved if this guy has added vowels, but they make the claim every vowel, every dot, every sound is perfectly preserved because vowels weren't even in there in the original document. Original Arabic, as we know, the language did not have vowels. It did not have dots or accentuation sound marks. It was just a basic script with no punctuation, no brackets, no dots, no vowels. So we know from this line, it had vowelization added 120 years after it was done by Uthman. And by Uthman, it already had 2 different revisions. So we know 3 revisions by then. Then as we read down, dots were placed on the letters which resemble one another during the days of Caliph Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. So this guy did a 4th revision, taking the one that had been done by Uthman, then the one that had been done by Imam Ali with the vowels added, and had placed dots on the letters so that you could say it correctly, because sometimes you would have a long A sound or a long O sound or something. When the vowels had been added, this happened. So he made another revision and added the dots. So you can see it is not perfectly preserved. There are many different versions. Each different version has 7 or 8 different ways you can recite it. And the versions don't always agree with which pieces go where, how you say each thing, and which words should be accentuated. And this is why Muslim scholars will roundly attack, sometimes offering threats of violence and murder, like they have with me, to anyone who fairly criticises this book. And remember, we're still just going through the basics. We're only going to go through the basics in this particular video. So let's return to our Wikipedia reading and see what it has to say. The most common criticisms concern various pre-existing sources that the Quran relies upon, internal consistency, clarity, and ethical teachings. According to Toby Lester, many Muslims find not only the religious fault-finding but also Western scholarly investigation of this textual evidence disturbing and offensive, which I can attest to. So you can imagine, this didn't go down too well with the Islamic scholars, the Muslim Brotherhood and the authorities of the Islamic religion in those Arab countries, considering their entire law and culture is based off the proposition that this is a holy book from God, and it is perfectly preserved. Now the open secret was out, virtually everyone knew, despite being unable to say so, they accepted that the Quran is actually not perfectly preserved by Muhammad. It has been changed, altered and corrupted, and therefore it cannot possibly be the claimed divine writings from Allah, and Allah therefore is probably not going to end up being God, because if it was, he would have managed to perfectly preserve his text, wouldn't he? They wouldn't be arguing, killing each other, arguing about which one of these books is actually from him. And I would like to conclude this video with one last thing. This is a more recent book than each one of those Quran copies that we went through. This is a book called The Reliance of the Traveller, and this is like a lawyer book. This is a physical dot-by-dot listing, or a bullet list, of all the laws of the Islamic world, for all the different sects and communities and groups of different Muslims. And I'm not going to read this to you now because it's even worse. It's even more boring than the Quran, if such a thing was possible. But what we find in rule number 8 is they have a thing called permissible lying. Permissible lying is something which was developed in order to help support this view that Allah wrote the Quran and it's perfectly preserved. And the initial permissible lie that is described in this book, The Reliance of the Traveller, is if anyone says anything against your religion, if you are Islamic, you are compelled by law to use one of these permissible lies in order to prop up the historical accuracy and the divinity of the Quran. Now that includes fair, honest criticism. So if I bring a Muslim a fair, honest criticism and I say there's dots and vowels in this book now which weren't originally in there, surely we can agree that this means it is not perfectly preserved. They will tell me a permissible lie, and then they are compelled by their law code to punish me and call me a liar if I do not immediately accept that and I continually critique this book or these books here. And that's the summary I want to get to. I will link you a video, and videos are going to be coming out later tonight and tomorrow, which go into the finer detail of this. So if you want the evidence more than what I've shown you, those guys are going to show it to you, good friends of mine. But for now, I just want you to keep in mind, point A, the Quran is definitely not perfectly preserved word for word, dot for dot in any kind of way. We can see that. There are at least 8 different recitations, and for those 8 different recitations there's 5 or 6 different versions, and there's hundreds of different translations by hundreds of different individuals. So there are literally thousands of permissible ways of saying the Quran, writing the Quran, and there are many dozens of different books which all claim to be perfectly preserved. So we know 100% A, it is not a perfectly preserved book. B, therefore, if it is not perfectly preserved, and even from the first day Muhammad himself admits in the Quran page that he was using that there are 7 different ways to recite this book, we can say this is probably not a divine text at all. It is not from God, because God would have communicated it in a far more effective fashion, and his original revelation of divine truth would not have led to so many arguments and wars and people wanting to commit violence upon each other just by arguing which one of these was actually from him. Think about it. If God said something to you, you would know that it was God speaking to you, surely, if it was God. So point B, it is not a divine text when we are talking about these Qurans. They are humanized texts from people. These are people talking about what they think God is rather than what God said to them. And the third point is this. Muslims are compelled by their own law to lie to you, to tell you permissible lies, to offer you threats of violence and harass you, and tell you that you are a liar with a false allegation, with a false accusation, if you dare criticize these books, despite the fact that, as we went through, their own authorities and their own scholars admit freely now that this book is not perfectly preserved and is more than likely not the work of any god. So keep that in mind when you are arguing about the Quran, or when you are negotiating, interfacing with Muslims, the Quran of the Muslim worshippers. Know that you cannot trust what they say, not because of my opinion, because of the fact that they will tell you, despite this table of different Qurans here, they are sending me death threats in the comments right now. I had more this morning, saying Daily Corvid's a liar, there's only one Quran, there is not different versions. Yes, there are. And that the different versions are wrong because they don't agree with this original one, which is definitely perfectly preserved. No, it isn't. It has vowels and it has dots. And that Muslims are not allowed to lie concerning this. Yes, they are, because we know from this book that they will easily tell permissible lies, and if they don't prop these lies up in conversation with us Westerners, they will be punished under law. If they do not lie about it, they are a criminal in their own law. So that's the end of this video. I hope I made my point. It's not perfectly preserved. It's not a divine text. Muslims are going to lie to you about it 100% when you meet them, all different Muslims. And if they do not, they will be heavily physically penalised by their own law. And don't think that their law doesn't affect them because they're in Britain. This book describes how Islamic law is applied per person. It transcends the boundaries of countries, which means they ignore our laws, and this is the one that they apply and follow. And that is the reason why Muslims have honour killings, secret Sharia police stations, and why the government are compelled, and the BBC are compelled, to propagandise people in order to limit the fear and the dislike that people will have, knowing how they are so disrespectful to our culture and they ignore our safety and our laws. So that's all for now. I'm going to link you some other videos, and I think a dear friend of mine, Humble Servant, has a video coming out tomorrow or tonight, and I would absolutely 100% recommend, if you want the fine detail of what I've been telling you now and you really want to know for sure that what I'm saying is true, go and watch Humble Servant's video when it comes out, and make sure you don't miss that, because he is one of the finest scholars you will find. He will not leave any stone unturned, and he will supply you all the evidence, and he will show you clips of the Islamic guy speaking, which I haven't done here. So go and watch that as soon as you get a chance, as soon as it's out. I hope you enjoyed this and you learned something. God bless you all, and I'll see you lovely people in the next one. Bye now. And if they are willing to lie about the nature of God and his revealed holy truth, what else are they willing to lie to us about? And I'll leave you on that question. So, have a lovely, lovely day. God bless you all, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next video. Bye now. Bye, 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 bye.